Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I know we're very excited about this lecture and about this weather. It's like, yay, for one moment or two, and then it'll maybe snow. Who knows? Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Kate Markert. I'm Executive Director here at Hillwood Estate Museum and Garden in Washington, D.C. We are so pleased to have audiences joining us here live in the theater, but also by Zoom. We probably have as many people by Zoom as we have here in the theater. I know those of you who've been here before know that the next thing I'm going to ask you is to make sure all of your devices are silenced, those of you in the room. Those of you who are joining us by Zoom in your jammies can just listen along, and whenever you have a question, just go to the Q&A module and submit your questions, and then whenever they cross your mind, and at the end, we will take questions both from in the theater and by Zoom. Now, those of you who are asking, I'm sure, quite brilliant questions here in the theater, please wait until the microphone gets to you so that our colleagues on Zoom can hear your fabulous, brilliant questions. I would like to take this moment to acknowledge those who have made the additional commitment to support Hillwood as members of our Legacy Council. Many, many thanks for your thoughtful planning to help ensure a vibrant future for Hillwood. Now, tonight's lecture is the final of our three-part series highlighting our current exhibition, On Time, Giving Form to the Fleeting. So even though this is the last one of the lectures that are associated with this show, I'm asking you to join us for some other upcoming program that's also related to the exhibition. We are going to have, and this is just for you, Mary, we are going to have an on-time themed trivia night, April 16th. We're having a concert by Amy K. Bourmet called Time Travel on April 29th. Now, I don't know if you know Amy K. Bourmet. She's performed at Hillwood before, always to a sold-out crowd. Please don't miss it. It's really a very, very special evening. You can also see a documentary that Nico is featured in called Keeper of Time, and that's on May 20th. It's one of our dinner time documentaries, and if you haven't done that, you really owe it to yourself. You can have a delicious dinner in the Hillwood Cafe, and as you know, we don't normally serve dinner, but we have special dinners for the dinner time documentaries, and it's really just a perfect way to enjoy the springtime gardens here and then see a great film. So I hope you'll join us. Now, tonight, we are very excited to hear from Nicole Cox about her craft as an artist and an antiquarian horologist, the new vocabulary for you. There's a section of the exhibition featuring Nico and her work, and if you haven't had a chance to see On Time yet, please be sure to come back soon. It's a wonderful exhibition and bears seeing again and again. But before I hand over the mic, I wanted to share a little bit about Nico. Brittany Nicole Cox is an artist, scholar, guillocheuse, and antiquarian horologist. She will explain that later. Antiquarian horologist, her lifelong passion for horology has seen her through 9 years in higher education, where she earned her watchmaking certifications, 2 clock-making certifications, and a master's in the conservation of clocks and related dynamic objects from West Dean College in the UK. Her work has been shown at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York and was featured in a National Geographic and 2 feature-length documentaries. She has written for Vanity Fair and is the curator for the Horological Society of New York. She opened her studio, Memoria Technica, in 2015, where she teaches, makes original work, and specializes in the conservation and restoration of fine singing bird automata and other mechanical objects. Her practice looks at the relationships between nature, memory, time, and the sublime with a focus on handcraft. You are in for a real treat. Now, please join me in welcoming Nico Cox to the podium.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you so much to Hillwood for hosting me. It's been a wonderful year working with Hillwood, and I feel a little bit like family at this point, so I'm very happy to be here. I know it's a lot of work to put these on and to put on the exhibitions that they do, and I feel very fortunate to have been featured in the latest exhibition. So if you haven't been there, please definitely check it out. It's fantastic. So this evening we're going to be kind of having a horological discourse, I like to say. This is basically a history of the archetypal knowledge that generated my craft. It's really something that has informed every element of my career. In the context in which these objects were made that I focus on, basically this is a type of knowledge that led to the development of many different crafts, from the ornamental turning of kings to a decorative style called engine turning or guillocheuse. And this is also employed in many of the objects I work on, and many of these are obviously horological. So the beginning of this history starts with the 7 classical liberal arts. You may be wondering why I'm starting so far back in time here, but this originated in the time of the Greeks. So basically these are born from the same set of knowledge that we consider to be divine knowledge. So we have the trivium on the left, which is rhetoric, logic, and grammar, and we have the quadrivium on the right, which is arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. So the sacred subjects, which were considered divine knowledge, have the little stars next to them. But the reason this was considered divine knowledge is that all of these subjects have to do with math, and at the time, math was considered infallible knowledge because basically mathematical truths don't really change. Well, a mathematician, I'm sure, would say different, especially out in space, but to my humble understanding, many of these things stay the same, such as a triangle always has 3 sides. So if you could become a student of these subjects and become quite skilled in their application, you were considered a student of the divine. So when we look at the quadrivium, we have arithmetic, which is the study of numbers. We have geometry, the study of numbers in space. We have music, the study of numbers in time, and astronomy, the study of numbers in space and time. So the 2 subjects I'm concerned with, ornamental turning and horology, both come through this. Geometry is where ornamental turning was born from, and horology is a child of astronomy. So this idea that ornamental turning was created from these is this idea, and the same with horology and astronomy, is that the universe operated based on harmonic principles. So ornamental turning is basically a practice that creates patterns in an underlying material. It's a decorative technique in which very precise and repetitive patterns mechanically engraved into a material via engine turning using a machine or a lathe with the same name, a rose engine. Our earliest known account of a rose engine in print is from a book called Mechanic and Exercises, or a Doctrine of Handiworks, which was published in 1683 by Joseph Moxon, although we know that the engine was in use before this time. This is one of the earliest pieces we know that was engine turned. This is from 1539. It's a box in the form of a rose with a portrait of Anne of Cleves painted by Hans Holbein, who is likely German. But the most important thing about this, in my opinion, I'm sure the painter might say otherwise, but is this beautiful turning that we see here. You can see how the artist was really trying to imitate a flower. You can see the geometric of the petals and the center, which utilizes the golden ratio basically to create these little pieces on the inside. So ornamental turning found its origins in the Platonic solids. This print of 1543 from a group of texts from the German Empire, here the Platonic solids are explained as the building blocks of our universe. So much like atoms, The structure of all things was thought to be made up of perfect geometric shapes. Plato associated each of these, the four classical elements, earth, air, water, and fire, with a regular solid. Earth was associated with the cube, air, the octahedron, water, the isohedron, and fire with the tetrahedron. Of the fifth Platonic solid, Plato said something kind of non-committal, but basically that the god used this shape to arrange all the constellations of the whole earth and heaven. And this was basically a belief in a geometric systemic universe that was born here in the house of Plato. And it was really the foundation stone for leading scientists, sovereigns, and societies well into the 17th century. Isaac Newton, who was an English mathematician and physicist born in 1642, was the first person to discover a new mathematical system since Euclidean geometry in 300 BC. Isaac Newton was famously known for believing in the clockwork universe, the idea that God was a clockmaker. So the seven liberal arts doctrines found their way both into the East and the West, and this was translated from Greek into both Arabic and Latin. They bore great influence both over the Germanic and Islamic philosophies, and this is a print from 1568 by the renowned goldsmith of 16th century, Wenzel Jemnitzer. It's a compendium of perspectival geometry, which consists mostly of these Platonic solids and then variations with 24 polyhedral variants based on these. So this print in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt, this is from 1732. It shows these ornamentally turned ivory objects, but these objects are actually much older. This was from a print from a catalog that showed the curios of a cabinet from a very important collector, an esteemed engineer, Nicolas Vallier. So in the West, these Greek texts were mostly used to influence kings and how they ended up making these objects as a way to kind of study those divine subjects, the quadrivium. And it ended up being that kings, the more accomplished they got at these works, the more they had a claim to their kingdom. So while the lathe was being used in the 14th century nobility trained to turn these items on the lathe, in the East they were using the same text for quite a different purpose. We'll get into that in a minute. But the act of princely turning basically led to a revolution in their understanding of God. So God as a geometer in the time of the Greeks became God as a turner in the minds of these sovereigns, because what better way is there to make a sphere than to turn it on the lathe? So the ornamental lathe would allow one to summon basically these incredible variations of sacred geometric forms. And these spiraling ivory springs and concentric spheres nesting one inside the other just allowed a king to basically exercise their knowledge in math and prove that they were basically entitled to their throne. So by varying the phase of a singular waveform through a series of repetitious cuts, you can generate these very complex structures. So rosettes carry these waveforms, and the operator determines the phase, and thus governing the sequence and what kind of forms would appear. It took a turner anywhere from 12 to 18 months to make one of these objects. And I think if only our rulers were very busy making things like this, it'd be lovely if we could go back in time. But it's this idea of, how do we imitate God in terms of our abilities, our cognitive and creative capacities through the lathe. And what's even more incredible is perhaps the machines that they use to make these types of objects. When we think about a lathe, we're not thinking of something like this. This was perhaps the earliest form of an automatic machine. This is actually the technology of the Industrial Revolution 300 years before, but it was only reserved for kings and sovereigns. So this machine, really quite an incredible advancement for its age, was probably made for the King of Prussia, Frederick I. And this is also from 1740. Now, engine turning became so popular that it started to show up in all kinds of places, right? So from things like buttons to things like watches. Now here we have on the left some beautifully ornamentally turned buttons, and as we look at this watch, you'll start to see that by the 18th century, this started to appear in other forms, and in this case, the same type of patterning is done on the back of the watch. So here we are kind of getting into the subject in which I'm most concerned, horology. So this is the idea that time has been with us always. The recognition of time has been with us since the very beginning and is perhaps one of the only true fundamental things other than food and survival that we have in common with the very first of our kind, pre-Homo sapiens, born over 100,000 years ago, the observation and study of time. So returning to the Greeks, we can see that they were pioneers of complex mechanisms. This is a replica of the Antiquarian mechanism that is in the National Museum of American History. This is quite incredible because this is, when it was found, they didn't know what it was, took X-ray to figure out what it was, and then they reconstructed it and found that it was a working astronomical calculator, basically or calendar, for predicting the movement of celestial bodies. So what we found was evidence that the things written about in manuscripts, such as the 7 ancient wonders of the world, actually existed. While none of these things have, we haven't found the physical remains of these other items, this is proof that they were actually creating these objects at that time, and were perhaps creating the things called automata that are written about that were the first synthesis of artificial life. So in the East, as I was saying, these documents weren't used for ornamental turning. They were used for geometric patterning in the artwork, but they were also used for making automata, something that in the West was seen as kind of a magic or something that was considered perhaps evil. They had heard about these things. There's accounts of people visiting the East and thinking they had to do with perhaps necromancy or raising the dead to create them. But this here is a print of a document that was by a mathematician, Al-Jazari, who made this piece that is quite interesting. It's from 1000 or 1400 AD, although some sources date it specifically to 1206, but it's a clock that's quite intricate. Every half hour, the bird on the top will whistle. The man below drops a ball into the mouth of the dragon, and the rider would hit the elephant with that stick. So it took 100 years or more for the West to embrace automata. And this is an interesting piece because while the kings of the West are making these rather elaborate objects of ivory, we have automata happening there in the East. And eventually, in 1562, we have this piece, which is a monk. It's a penitent monk that was created when a king's son took quite a tumble down some stairs, and he made a deal with God that if God would heal his son and give him this miracle, he would grant a miracle in return. And in that, he hired Juan Trevino, who was Trevino, who was the clockmaker at the time that had built an amazing astronomical clock. He hired him to build this miniature penitent monk. So this was his penitence to God for healing his son. And we're looking at the act of mechanized prayer. So he was able to go on ruling the kingdom, and this monk, he could just wind it up and have it do all of his prayers. Thank you, God. I'm winding my monk, going about my day. So meanwhile, we have transoceanic travel becoming more and more important. So what comes with that, right? We only knew how to calculate latitude, which is relatively simple, but longitude was not something that was easily figured out. So scientists and navigators have been working on this problem for quite a long time, but this was only done through something called dead reckoning, which is not super accurate. You need to know your travel, your heading, your elapsed time, and your speed, basically, and that's how you calculate your longitude without the sight of land. But as we know from a lot of disasters that took place, and specifically the 1707 disaster that claimed over 2,000 lives, it was not particularly accurate. So the Queen Anne Act, the Longitude Act of 1714, was put in place to try to get someone to solve this problem. And of course, somebody did. So we have this solved by John Harrison, who was a clockmaker and cabinet maker. Actually, he was a woodworker and cabinet maker first, but he had a different way of thinking about things. And I believe it was that, and also working with people in London, that he came up with the solution of H4, which was the first ship's chronometer. Now, you may not think this is as important as longitude, but it's quite important music. So we have one of the first effective recordings of music that comes about with the development of the pinned cylinder. So this is a clock by Charles Clay, who was a clockmaker at the time that worked with George Friedrich Handel, a famous composer, who composed all of the tunes for Mr. Clay's clocks. So what's incredible about this is that in the composition of tunes for this clock, we believe that Handel may have actually had a hand in pinning the cylinder, because this mechanism allowed him to change the rate of attack of the note, the decay of the note, and it allowed him to create tunes or write songs that weren't previously accessible, in the sense of an organ. You know, a pianist only has, we have what, how many fingers? 10? So if you have 24 notes at your disposal versus 10 at a time, he was able to write more complex tunes than previously able. So if we notice on this barrel, you can see there are some bridges or pins that are slightly longer. That would change the duration of the note being played. Pretty fantastic. Not quite like changing a CD. I think once you bought one of these, you were stuck with the same set of tunes for a while. So there's actually not that many of these that are still in their original configuration, because people with fashion would change out the barrels, but quite an incredible accomplishment of engineering for the time. So not that long later, this is an interesting timeline. We have oceanic travel, we have music, we also have these automata that start to come in. So we have a really famous automaton maker named Jacques de Vaucanson. He was actually he was a surgeon, really. He was studying anatomy, the circulation system, the heart, and he became really rather obsessed with reanimating the dead. This was as close as he got. And in fact, these automata did utilize real skin. So his flute player actually had human skin for the fingers to make contact with the flute, but he was the first maker that was able to create automata that actually performed the acts that previous attempts could only simulate. So his flute player really played the flute, his duck really defecated, and the tambourine player really played as well. Now the duck is quite famous. You know, this automaton in particular was a fan favorite. It flapped its wings and cavorted duckishly as it did its little performance, and the wings had over 400 moving pieces in them alone. Now, none of his automata survive today, but this particular artifact, they said, could flap its wings, drink water, digest grain, and excrete it in a changed form. So. Later on, actually, it was revealed to be a fake. It would excrete basically breadcrumbs with food coloring, but very convincing at the time. So following along Vaucanson's work, and he actually gave up making automata and went on to invent the automatic loom, which is still in place today, so we can thank him for all of our comfy sweaters and things that are not as expensive. We had a Swiss maker coming in on the scene, Jacques Droz, and he invented 3 figures as well. He had a writing boy, a drawing boy, and a woman that actually played the piano. So these 3 figures were also quite advanced for their time. Jacques Droz is responsible for a lot of wonderful inventions, which we can thank him for later, but this boy is considered to be the world's first programmable computer, because the writer could be arranged to write any message up to 40 characters. So the very act of writing in this case was engineered. The wheel controlling the cams was made up of letters that could be removed and replaced and reordered, and this allowed the writer to be programmed to make any word or sentence, making it, as we said, basically a distant relative of the first programmable computer. Later developments built upon this, the work of Droz, such as the Millier automaton. That was made in 1800 and is actually at the Franklin Institute. Both that one could write and draw, so it was much more complicated than this figure. innovations for these automata didn't just include these complicated mechanisms, but for the Millet automaton, the maker actually invented the first pressurized ballpoint pen. This was not released to the public market for quite a long time, but this automaton had it well before any of us. So you can see here, this is actually written by that boy automaton. This is from 1810, so it's very early in the creation of that piece. And if we look at it, we can actually see the difference in pressure and line thickness. Pretty incredible. Since he did draw as well, the drawings also had a lot of detail. Certainly makes it more human. Now, this is likely the original presentation of an object that's very near and dear to my heart in this lineage. I don't think any other object, in my estimation, really conjures humanity's reverence for birds as much as this. This is a rendition of the silver swan automaton that is showing it is in likely what would have been its original setting. So it would have actually had a moving water part where it was floating and surrounded by mirrors and a moving spectacle at the top of light that really kind of crowned it as a deity. So the swan, this was made in 1773, and it sits in a bed of contra-rotating twisted glass rods that are meant to simulate the movement of water. Tiny silver fish swim through this, giving it an even more lifelike animation. And this was made, as I said, in 18th century, and took the work of many, many craftsmen to build it, as you can imagine. Each of the rings in the neck are hand-chased, all the feathers meant to replicate real swan feathers. And you can see these fish are quite delightful. What's amazing about this is that they were engineering not just the movement of water, but how fish moved in the water. But most importantly, I think it's about how the light, as it hits the glass, it reflected the light of the water on the underside of the swan's feathers. When Mark Twain saw it, he believed that it had a lifelike quality and an elegance and an intelligence that he had not seen in anything like it before. When this was purchased by the Bose Museum, they actually bought it for the price of scrap. It had gone so out of fashion at the time. Now, obviously, it's one of the world's greatest treasures. If you want to see it, I highly recommend a visit to Barnard Castle. Or you can watch this video. Those fish were lucky they got away. I do highly recommend this film, Mechanical Marvels. That gentleman would now turn to us and say, "A mechanical marvel." Continuing this lineage of wonder, we have Jean-Robert Houdin. So he was quite an incredible figure in the history of horology. In fact, he was meant to be a lawyer. His family business was that of a lawyer. And when he was in law school, he graduated and happened to stop into a bookshop to grab a couple of books. And unfortunately, or fortunately, what he thought was a set of books on law was a set of books on magic, and the world changed. So he went on to be a watchmaker and actually married the daughter of a famous clockmaker and invented some of the world's most fabulous mechanical magic tricks. He actually utilized electricity for the first time in his magic shows, and this is the mystery clock, which he also invented. So anybody know how these work? No one here is a magician, so probably we're not supposed to share that information, but the mechanism is actually in the base here. And there is a tube, a glass tube that runs through the inside, and there's a really delicate crown wheel and cam system that runs up in the top that moves the hands. But all the action happens below, and it's quite an incredible effect. So as Robert Houdin became more famous with his magic, he invented something called the orange tree. The orange tree is a fabulous trick that basically saved France, really. He became so famous with this trick, it was heard around the world, and they hired him to put down, the government hired him to put down a rebellion, and he saved France. So through his magic, he was able to apparently convince this angry mob to trust him. And I don't know how many watch and clockmakers can put that on their resume, that they saved their country, but Robert Houdin, there you go. This trick was so famous.
The leaves would
this is a
start
replica
to
featured
move,
on one of my favorite
and
magic
oranges
shows.
would appear on the orange tree. One of the most beautiful pieces of magic ever made. Absolutely gorgeous. And now, possibly worth more than the ring. So,
He's not telling
if
you
you would
stole a
accept
ring
this,
from a woman.
still a quiver. For those who think that perhaps it was all mechanical, can I just take these off and show you something? The oranges were real, and they would be passed around the audience. In fact, just before this one goes, for the viewers at home, can I just show you that they really are real oranges? And if you'd hand those out, Debbie, to the various people around. Can I just have, oh, you haven't got a cloth. Never mind. Sorry, it's okay. I just didn't want anybody to cut themselves with that. It's very sharp. Now, the next thing that would happen on the tree is, oh, the top orange, which was not real, would open. Two butterflies would rise into the air, bringing with them the handkerchief, and also bringing with them a ring.
So that lady was very happy to have her ring back, as you can imagine. But that was one of the most charming parts of that trick, is Robert Houdin would go into the audience and slip something away from somebody, and then it would be revealed at the end of the act, carried in this handkerchief. Now, this was so famous, even our beloved Fabergé knew of it, and he created the bay tree egg as a homage to Houdin and Jacques Edros, who invented the singing bird. So this beautiful bay tree egg has a singing bird mechanism there in the tree, and so instead of a handkerchief, we have this touch, but it was also a homage to Houdin. And this was created in 1911. And Fabergé was really influenced by working basically in the Hermitage. So he got to work with a lot of artifacts and study things that had been made in previous generations. And it was through his work with those artifacts that I believe he secured the legacy of Fabergé, because he turned from kind of being a jeweler's shop into the artist goldsmith shop and started creating things like this. What does this remind you of? So this little piece, another one of the eggs, was created as a homage to the silver swan. Does anybody know, can anyone guess what this little swan is made out of? It's gold, but he's silver plated. But he made 52 of these Easter eggs. We know some of these are in the collection here at the museum. I'm hoping that I can convince them to get some of these mechanical ones. We'll see. Don't think they're very available, but this is truly one of my absolute favorite. So not only that, we have James Cox, who made the silver swan. I don't know if I mentioned that. James Cox and John Joseph Merlin created the swan. James Cox also created something called the peacock clock, which is at the Hermitage. Now, where would Peter Carl have been inspired to make something like this? Possibly from seeing the same piece there in the Hermitage. So this little mechanical peacock, tiny version of the famous clock there, is also another one of the most wonderful eggs, I believe, that he made. Of course, the Tsar gave, I believe, all these mechanical eggs to his mother. For some reason, she got the best, in my opinion. But out of 52, I don't think there were many that were quite that fabulous in my opinion. But here is the peacock clock. Now, what's incredible about this was actually ordered by Catherine the Great, and it took some ungodly amount of time to finish. I think by the time it got there, the Hermitage was finished, but it took her clockmakers 15 years to rebuild it. It is the only automaton from this period and the only piece by James Cox in existence that is still in its original setting. So this truly is like looking back into the 18th century, which is quite incredible. So the work of Fabergé obviously is unrivaled in so many ways, but it is also one of the most successful combinations of both engine turning, ornamental turning, and horology. Here, these pieces all are finely engraved with guilloche patterns and enamel, and each one of these has a mechanical surprise. Now, at the same time that Fabergé was making these beautiful works of wonder, here we were making mechanical fuse detonators for our bombs. So, yeah, World War I, 1915, 1918, we have this technology in use for detonators. And interestingly enough, about 20 years later, those same types of detonators were used to detonate these two bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So an interesting lineage of using the same technology for two very different purposes. But of course, it wasn't all terrible. We have horology being used for space exploration. So we have, this is not the Apollo 11 mission, didn't have as good of a photo for that one, but the Apollo 11 mission in 1969 utilized a timer, actually. Not an electronic timer, because that malfunctioned, but this small mechanical timer, which was instrumental in the moon landing. So this worked in 60-second and 6-minute intervals. And this mechanism was actually later improved upon for the first lunar detonation tests on the moon's surface in zero gravity by, or not zero gravity, but lunar gravity by Charles Augustus Sauter, who was a lead engineer at Bulova. So we're actually still using technology to advance things today and to protect us. These are really tiny watch-based mechanisms that are basically the nuclear fail-safe in every warhead. So this tiny watch basically makes sure that they're not accidentally detonated. This was implemented in 2011, and it's a mechanical safe arming detonator. Right now, though, they're thinking about sending a clockwork rover to Venus. So we know that electronics won't work on the atmosphere in Venus, and pretty much most materials will collapse like a tin can under your foot or aluminum can under your foot due to the pressure in the atmosphere. So the engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory have been trying to think up solutions for this problem, and right now they're considering basically a rover that's based on the Charles Babbage adding machine. So this was conceived in 2015, but they're still working on it. So when we talk about this lineage, one of the most important things is the preservation of horology and heritage. I was very fortunate to attend Wesleyan College under the tutelage of Matthew Reed, who was actually the conservator that worked on the Silver Swan automaton. And it was really amazing to get his perspective and kind of understand that these things have their own life and their own purpose. And as a conservator, we're stewards of that and that information. You know, how do we ensure that these objects will carry forward that knowledge and that experience into the future? Now to do that, you can get a bit carried away. So this is a 5,000 square foot workshop that belonged to Dennis Harmon. He was a horologist in Wolcott, Connecticut that was famous in small circles for doing great work. I inherited, in a sense, part of his shop. So I didn't obviously take all of that. My shop is much smaller. But really, to do all this work and to do it really well, you need to understand many different technologies, processes, and materials. And you need to have the tools to do those things. So yeah, I mean, maybe I'll have a 5,000 square foot building someday, but going through this shop taught me that might be a difficult task. These are some of the things that he had, all of which have a different purpose for the most part, or there's a different design in how they're used. This is a really tiny depthing tool. Now, in a mechanism, you have a gear train, and the power has to be transmitted through that gear train and it has to happen smoothly and effectively in order for the power to move from one end of the train to the other. Now, you must imagine that the relationships between all the pieces in the train have to be plotted very carefully. And so you have a depthing tool. These come in many different sizes, and for many different sizes of mechanisms, you need a size for each one. This is a balance screw scale. So when you have a balance wheel watch, if you know that tick, tick, tick sound, if you have a wristwatch, that is the sound of your balance oscillating from left to right and releasing energy from the escapement. In order for that to work really well, that balance also has to be balanced. So the weight has to be distributed evenly across, and there's actually tiny scales for weighing the screws that you can adjust basically the timing of the watch using something like this. This is a fusee engine. So before springs became more reliable with manufacturing techniques as they improved over time, you had to have a separate mechanism in the mechanism that basically equaled out the power curve of your spring so that the spring would distribute the same amount of power through its duration of winding and unwinding. So you had to have something called a fusee engine to cut a cone that matched the power distribution of your mainspring. So very specific. This is a staking set. Now, there's lots of different tools there, and you may think, oh, well, okay, you've got one. Maybe they all do something similar. Well, they do, but you need all of them in order to work on different watches or different things of various sizes. This is a wheel topping tool. So this is for adjusting wear in a gear train. So say you have a worn wheel or something, you can actually adjust the shape of the teeth using this tool and then re-depth it in the gear train. So this brings me to my work. See, my shop's a bit smaller, wasn't exaggerating. Have quite a lot of tools of different kinds, not as many as Dennis, but large library, different types of books, and benches for different purposes, watchmakers' lathes, larger lathes, clockmakers' lathes, gear cutting lathes, wheel cutting lathes, engine turning machines, a lot of different things. And that's my bench, which is very dear to me. It was also Dennis Harmon's bench. So I do feel like I'm carrying on a legacy. And here are some of the projects I've had the privilege to work on. These are throughout my career and also when I was in school. This is a tiny automaton ship that was made as a Battle of Trafalgar memorial from 1810. And because when I received it, it was silent, I didn't actually know for sure what it played or what it did, but it was in making this test barrel that I was able to find out what the tune was, along with examining the pins of the original barrel. So I had to make a silver case for this, for the pocket, from sheet, and then covered it in shagreen. Hopefully you can hear that. Pretty delightful. Oh, thank you. So this is an interesting fellow, probably a case for quitting smoking if anyone smokes. This is a smoking automaton. So there's a bellows system inside these that actually inhale and exhale cigarettes, and over time that breaks down, of course, as the human lungs do. So one of the projects I did was building a machine that smoked cigarettes with different materials. So here's that at work. I definitely did smell like a casino for quite a while after this. But I was testing all the different materials for the bellows to see which one would be the best for the automaton, because obviously every time the bellows system breaks down, there's intervention, and that poses risk to the automaton. So how do we make it run longer? Well, improve the materials in which are, in contact with carcinogens. And here's the fellow smoking now, so quite dapper. I do wonder if Marjorie had been a man, if she would have had one of these in her parlor. Okay, now this is quite a lovely piece. I had the privilege to work with the National Trust while at Westdean on this. This was a piece that had been brought over and was modified in its basically its original way. So it was part of the sing-song trade. And when it went over to China, the emperor had it modified so it would play more like Eastern music instead of Western waltzes. And so when it was on display at Anglesey Abbey, the visitors got used to hearing it this way, and instead of restoring it, visitors wanted the music to sound like it had in this strange, altered, and worn-down state. So there was a big project after I left to basically, we recorded this music and they built a motor to drive the automata, preserving the original mechanism and keeping the music the same. Now, sometimes you have to take a lion to the vet. In this case, this is Rex. He was a very cute automaton that belonged to a little boy, and he needed help. So there's a little boy. Can you guys spot Rex? He's in there. But part of my job that I love is getting to restore these things for families because it really brings back nostalgia for them. There's Rex ready to pounce and growl again. After surgery, still wearing his bandages. So these things are very tiny also. This is a singing bird, little bitty singing bird about the size of my pinky. It's a tiny robot. So it's got a little gearing system inside that actually rotates its head and flaps its wings. Quite complicated. The invention of Jacques Droz that we heard before, who Fabergé commemorated in the egg, the Batry egg. The fine feathers of hummingbirds were used to decorate these, and it takes about 15 hours to feather one from beginning to end. In this case, a pinion was missing. I'm also running through this a bit fast because I'm running out of time. So this guy is running too fast, though. He sounds like he had way too much sugar at the hummingbird feeder. But after servicing him, he realized, okay, the spring was a bit too strong that he came with, so ideally they would have me replace the spring with a slightly weaker one. Now, this is a fun piece that actually came to me in the condition on the left. It was missing all of its foliage, but it was made for a governor and by the Bantams firm in the 1800s. And so I rebuilt all the flowers, serviced the mechanism, but sadly the birds were left a little zombified still. They need a little more TLC, and I hope that that'll happen at some point. But this actually even has a little butterfly. It's basically my zoo if you want to come visit me. You know, see my shop, it's full of mechanical animals. I was very happy to finally get that going again. This is Buford, the bubble-blowing bear. You'll actually see him in The Keeper of Time. He was featured in that. How delightful, right? And Beatrice, the cellist, although she's not really playing, obviously. Buford was blowing bubbles, though, so there's a little music box inside of her. Okay, very quick section on original work. This is some guilloche work that I've been doing. These were a set of coasters I made to auction off to raise money for the Ukraine war when that happened. And this is Portal, which was a homage to medieval clocks that you could see in the On Time exhibition. And I started making spinning tops because while I was learning how to do engine turning, I thought, God, I have all these discs and there's all these patterns. What do I do with this? And then I thought, well, I'll put a hole in it. And I stuck a pencil in there and realized, oh, look at that. So it makes a fun toy. I started making mineral stands because I really love, well, I love minerals. and also kind of figuring out how to work with some of the mount making skills that I learned as a mount maker from museums and how to mount things. So this is a porcelain moth on a combination engine turned stand that I made. And then I wanted to share engine turning, so I made a coloring book with all these patterns with Al Collins, who's a famous ornamental turning in Los Angeles, and did some ornamental turning I don't have one of these lathes, sadly, so if anyone here wants to buy me one, find me after. These are fantastic machines because this is the same technology those kings were using. And cochlea actually utilizes some engine or ornamental turning in its base. That was my student watch when I was in watchmaking school, and then 10 years later I made cochlea. So you can still see I'm quite excited about natural things. And there's a tiny bird in the watch mechanism on the left. Here's cochlea, and that was ornamental turning of the bottom of cochlea, of the base. And since you haven't seen the inside of cochlea, or what cochlea does, cochlea runs in a figure-8 pattern, which has to do with, basically, cochlea is about this whole talk, really. It's the marriage of God as a geometer, God as a clockmaker, and God as a turner all in one object. And the infinity symbol is a famous math symbol also famous for time. So that's why cochlea moves in a figure-8. Now, I've also had the privilege to take my guilloche to another level, and I made this watch for the Only Watch auction in Geneva, which is a charity auction that happens, or used to happen every year, or every 2 years, actually. But this pattern is called Birds, and it's about the poem by Emily Dickinson, Hope is the Thing with Feathers. Because birds, I think, give us hope more than anything, as we see them moving across the sky, when we hear their song, and even in the bird box when we hear it captured in a tiny mechanism. And I made the card for the HSNY lifetime membership. I utilized the same pattern, also because birds were a way of telling time. So bird pairings in nature were seen as a way to decipher the microseasons of Japan. And this beautiful painting was basically the inspiration for the enamel work that was on the front of the card. Now, as I've been thinking more about the natural world, I've also been thinking about the natural time scales that happen outside of us and outside of standard time. Because what is time, really? It doesn't actually exist. Not really, when you look at it on the molecular level. So I worked with artist Jonathan Keats and clockmaker Phil Abernethy, and we built this clock that tells 2 different times, standard time and bristlecone time, the time of trees. And it's easier for the Long Now Foundation to explain.
For thousands of years, humans kept time by carefully observing natural cycles. Spring wasn't a set day, but when a certain bird migrated, or insect sang, or wildflower emerged from the ground. Gradually, people made calendars more regular. Society now follows what's called coordinated universal time, calibrated to a billionth of a second. But something has been lost by this new standard of time. What might a new standard of time look like? What would time mean to a life form that measures it in millennia? High on a remote mountain in eastern Nevada live the bristlecone pine. With a lifespan approaching 5,000 years, these trees are the longest-lived complex organisms on Earth. They have outlasted civilizations, each limb sculpted by centuries of ice and drought. They are ideal natural calendars.
Oh, whoops. Sorry. Technical difficulties. I'm not good at old tech, I'll say that. Oh, and I guess I just ended it by accident. So, yeah, well, you didn't get to see the clock. I'm not sure if I can play this. No. Well, there. I'll just play from current slide. Oh, did I do it again? I did it again. Sorry, guys. You can have me fix your watch. Don't ask me to fix your PowerPoint.
It's a clock located in the Nevada Museum of Art.
I believe one of the most important things and the roles that these objects play in our history is that they build bridges of empathy over time, across time. This clock does have centuries of intention. And so we are building something that is meant to be around and meant to be engaged with, meant to be held by future generations.
The clock shows two different times. On the left, coordinated universal time. On the right, bristlecone time, which will slowly grow out of sync with Gregorian years. Each is correct.
Thinking about the future and thinking about the past, they're really two sides of the same coin. Our intentions now are that we are building things for the future. We are making something that we do intend to be engaged with in a big way that we hope people will calibrate their lives around, in a sense. So it actually does tell the time of bristlecone pine trees by taking ring core samples every year and measuring the growth rate over the given year. So, as you know, that's all. Thank you.
We can take questions now from the audience. If folks would like to raise their hands, a staff member will come by with a microphone.
Yes, I have the microphone, so whoever hand I see first, back there. Just make sure you hold the microphone close to your face when you're speaking so that everyone on Zoom can hear you as well.
Thank you. Thank you for such a lovely talk. I'm super excited. I did my dissertation on time and clocks, so lovely to see so much cool stuff. I'm wondering if you have a thought about dispensing with the leap second that we have voted on letting go of because of the synchronization problem with computers. Like, as a horologist, are you invested in syncing up with the universe, or are you happy to be done with this pesky technological problem?
Well, you might have gathered I don't put a lot of stock in time measurement, even as somebody who works with clocks and watches and spends a lot of my time watching time pass and making sure that the clock has struck the hours at the right time. Really, I think I'd be happy to see standard time disappear altogether, just because we've grown so out of sync with things in the natural world. I mean, we all have our own internal mechanism for time, just as a daisy does. And as those trees do. So I don't know if that really answers your questions. I guess I would say I'm not that fussed.
We have one question over Zoom. It's similar to the question I feel was just asked, but now that universal timekeeping is so easily accessible through phones and other personal devices, how do you envision the future of horology?
Well, I think it's all about what's handmade and preserving the artifacts of the past. I think that's where the watch industry comes in, especially now with luxury watches. People spend money on timepieces because of the craft it took to make them. So I think that's probably where things should go. Obviously, I don't think I would ever wear an Apple Watch. I have my antique Bulova watch. But yeah, I actually find when I wear this watch, I don't look at my phone. And I think if you did wear a mechanical watch, you probably looked at a lot more than you would your phone.
I have a question about your tree clock. Do you take a core sample every year from the same tree?
It's actually the dendrology lab at the University of Nevada that conducts the tree research, and they do it across the grove, I believe. They check the growth rate over the grove of trees to see what the average growth rate is, and then that's actually the clock runs 1 year behind every year, right? Because we can't predict the growth rate for the coming year. So every year is calibrated on the previous year's growth rate.
Hello. I noticed a lot of your tools seem to be like pretty antiquated or historical themselves. When do you choose to use like a historical tool versus maybe a modern or like custom built one?
Well, with modern tools, they just don't make them like they used to. So I'm pretty much all my tools are old. I have my watchmaking screwdrivers. I have a set of those that are new, a few of those that are new. And actually, I have all my Bergeon tools because I'm a snob and I love them. And those are all new. But I do have some antique Bergeon tools as well. I would just say it's whatever best does the job. Really whatever the object needs most, or the best way to serve the object's integrity or history. That's how I make that choice. But yeah, also quality. I mean, I'm a tool snob.
Hi. I wonder if you had seen the Scorsese movie Hugo.
Of course, yeah. See, it makes my life easy now. I just say, oh, I'm not an orphan and I don't live in a train station, but that's basically what I do.
We've got time for one more question over Zoom. Someone asks, how long is the education and training to become proficient? And how do you acquire your tools, as they may be very expensive?
Those are really good questions. I mean, I guess it determines what do you want to be proficient in. If you want to be a watchmaker and work in a service center, you can do a 2-year program. If you want to be a clockmaker and do restoration or something, I think you really need to spend quite a bit more time. Those are hard-won skills. They take a lot of determination and grit to really be bested by something 200 years old and keep going. So it really depends. I mean, I was in school for 9 years to get the qualifications I have to work with the objects I do. And I feel very fortunate for that. But every day I'm still learning something new. I mean, these things that were made so long ago, the people that were making them had half the resources that we did, or even less, and we don't even know how they made some of these things. So I'm learning all the time from the hands of the past. So I would say you never really stop learning. And as far as tools go, well, so that is a big barrier to entry because, as you can see, the tools are expensive and collectible, right? I mean, unfortunately, when I got out of school, I was competing with retired doctors and lawyers and engineers to acquire my tools because what's a more interesting hobby after you retire than working on clocks and watches, especially to people with, used to high-stress, high-level skilled jobs. So it is a really difficult thing. You need to have the aptitude, the space, and the resources and determination to see it through in order to work with the types of tools and machinery and objects that I do. And I would just say that I was really fortunate in many steps of my career along the way to acquire the tools and knowledge that I have. So it's not easy, but don't give up because it's the very best thing I think you can do with your life. Thank you.